Thank you for joining us today for talk and discussions. In this part of the project, Sleeping for Tomorrow, we'll meet different people around the world, sharing with us their opinion, ideas, and thoughts about the changing of our time and their hope for the future. Joining us today is Victor Mutelekesha, a Zambian artist and the founder of Lusaka Contemporary Art Center, and co-founder of Livingston Office Center of Contemporary Art. Victor is living between Lusaka, Zambia, and Oslo, Norway. Thank you for joining us today, Victor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask you, Victor, if you can tell us what is your approach concerning art and society?
So there was a time when I was in my early years as a student, or even before I went into the academy, when I perceived art as just a practice that intervening in society on such levels as comfort, aesthetics, and mostly based on visual aspect of things. But as I grew older, leaving academy and operating in society, I realized that art practicing was beyond the objects that I would be working with in my studio. What is currently happening in my general practice, whereby creating an art space as a space of intellectual discourse or as a space for interrogating ideas, it's also art practice. So that's how broadened, I think, my perspective of my attitude towards my practice has gone. I am still part and parcel of the artistic community that still operates with material, that still creates objects, that still creates performative interventions, for example. I'm still very much part of that, but I've just broadened it up to include creation of spaces.
I wanted to ask you, Victor, you are living between two continents and cultures. And I want to ask you if you can share with us your general observation concerning the similarity and differences between these two places.
Speaking of the similarities, the needs, personal and collective needs, are similar. So that's one of the things that I kind of realized, which wasn't it was a no-brainer. But also, there is a historical side of things. Much of my continent, I say this not with so much authority, but I am from the continent of Africa. Much of that continent was colonized at some point by this continent. There is a lot of that is mixed up through the period of colonization. There is a lot of cultural nuances. There are a lot of the physical manifestation of the mix between that continent and this continent because of the mix of people. So those are the bridges that kind of connects the two spaces. That's a very general kind of explanation of general similarities or general connection. My observation is that there is a different attitude towards family than the family attitude that I grew up with as growing up in Zambia. And that there's also a different attitude towards how people interact in communities. There's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. This is very so applicable where I come from, where the mother of my brother or my neighbor, the family next door can look out for me, no questions asked. They can come to my house, ask my mom, we are short of this, can we have this? They will have it if it's available in the home. It's totally, the dynamics here are totally different. When we moved in a new apartment, my excitement was, okay, we have these many neighbors, 12 apartments in the building. I went and gave invitation cards to everyone. I remember vividly one woman looking at me. She looked very surprised. So when I gave these invitation cards, I was excited. I invited other friends of ours. We were having a party out in the garden. It was the summertime. We moved into a new apartment. And guess what happened? 2 people from the entire block of 12 apartments came to the party. 2 people who were so curious. They came, we had a good time, but some of the people that didn't show up, I could see them from the angle of my eye, peeping through their balconies, looking down, seeing what's happening. They were just like looking and looking. I realized that moment that I broke the code of conduct. I went against what was the norm, that you don't just show up on somebody's door and say, hey, welcome to the party. You don't know me, but I'm like, okay, you are my neighbor. That's why I'm inviting you. So there are those dynamics of how we behave towards each other in what one would consider back home as, okay, this is a neighborhood, and we all look out for each other. If I'm having a funeral, for example, my neighbors come to console me. Here, when you have a funeral in your house, and even if we are direct neighbors, I may not even enter your house to say, I'm sorry, what happened to you? And it's very common. I mean, I've had funerals here of friends passing, and you know that if you just moved in an apartment, the next door neighbor will not even say, oh, I'm sorry, I hate what happened. They won't even say that. And to me, that's very interesting to realize of how we are so diverse in how we take things that are communal, personal, and kind of the dynamics are just different. It's a learning curve as well. I'm learning that this is how other people do things, and somehow my 21 years of staying here, some of that has begun to affect how I also look at the world, because I've lived here almost half my life. So that what that means is when those small elements that are affecting you, when you go back to your original space, you begin to somehow questioning yourself immediately. That, is this right? How am I supposed to behave in this moment? I am always in that space now.
Can you share with us your perception? Is there a difference between the grasp of personal space, time, and physical space between Zambia and Oslo?
And I'm always questioning when my space, especially when I'm back home, is always infringed upon. It's not respected. I don't want to be, for example, visited unannounced. I cannot say go away. I can't do that. It's disrespectful. But I'm also kind of, by chasing you away, I am causing harm, or rather I'm causing pain on you, but I'll keep that pain in myself by just accepting it, by sucking it up in that moment that, okay, you've come and I will accommodate you, or I'll be with you and do my errands with you, just to make sure that there is no harm done towards you. In Oslo, I'm always warned, if there will be a visit, if there will be an interaction, we are always making appointments. We are always giving each other space and time to make a decision on when that which you seek can be accommodated. My daily observation on how we kind of navigate physical space, for example, in Oslo, let's say we're going to catch a public transport, for example. In the stations where we're waiting for the public bus, there is always an unannounced negotiation that happens where you're standing, when you move into the station, you're always finding a space that is a little bit of a distance from the other person. When you get onto the public transport, you're always looking at, okay, who is sitting where, who is facing which direction, at which seat is where. Only when the public bus is extremely full will all the seats be occupied. So you're always mindful of where somebody is standing. In Zambia, it's different, maybe because our public transport, much of the public transports are very small, small buses. You got to squeeze yourselves. But that maybe has led to not being worried too much. Or even when you get into a discussion or interaction, there isn't much mindfulness of how close to this person.
We are now almost 2.5 years from the time of the beginning of the corona. And I would like to ask you if you can share with us, how was this time for you and what was evolving from this time?
I have had the most productive time of, it's been a very, very productive period. The first 2 weeks of the pandemic becoming official in Europe, I remember vividly the 9th of January of 2020, I was in New York City. And I flew back to Oslo. The week that followed, we were hearing of people coming back from Austria, winter holidays, coming back to Norway, coming with these crazy flus. And our hospitals getting inundated with extremely sick people. That was the beginning of it all. The lockdown wasn't there. There was no lockdown, but there was just this, you could feel the hysteria. It's beginning to build up in January. I was coming back here, and then even a friend of mine from New York followed me up here with her son, and we were having a week together in Oslo. But the talk of the disease had already started. The big breakout of the disease globally is happening towards the end of February, and March is coming, and governments start this hysterical closing this, closing that, regulation that, regulation that. The pandemic starts. The first 2 weeks when the lockdown and all the conditions on how we're going to be using public transport, the first few 2 weeks of the official inverted commas lockdown, I was a little bit hysterical myself. I was a little bit paranoid. I was a little bit scared because there was a lot of unknowns, right? And because of the lot of unknowns, I stayed away from public transport. I use a lot of public transport in the city. And that meant I couldn't go to my studio. It's winter. I cannot ride my bicycle on the slippery roads. I stayed in my apartment fearing the unknown.
I would like to ask, what was the situation in Zambia at the time of the corona? And if you can share with us, what was your experience from this?
My inability to go to Zambia, it wasn't a problem, I realized. It was a necessary, inverted commas, necessary evil not to travel, because you risk not coming back to your regular life, regular studio practice. I'm not in the habit of just producing objects in my studio. I'm very cautious on wastage of material, and my practice is very cautious of the impact of every little thing that I do. And that's how most of my projects take a long time. So 2 years to me wasn't a problem because some of my projects take 3 years to accomplish. They could be in layers or in levels, but it takes that long. But it also led to other means of me being able to practice without travel, instructing, or having to discuss the developments of projects, doing it for the very first time ever, and using non-physical interactions to instruct the production or to continue my intervention in the Zambian society with my expanded practice. So there was no letdown, there was no stopping. The moment I got out of the shock of lockdown, and the moment I got out of the shock of my hysterical fears and unknowns and all that stuff, there was no letdown, there was no stoppage. The most that towers above all is I was able to realize the lifelong dream, really. It was in these 2.5 years that my most ambitious project was realized. And I think it'll be it'll be something that I think would tower above everything that I'll ever do in this world.
I would like to ask you if you can tell us what was the situation in Zambia at the time of the corona, and if you can share with us what was your experience from this.
All the information that I received was via the experiences of my brothers, my family, and my friends. Much of corona, at least of what I've gathered, was concentrated in the bigger cities, for the simple reason that bigger cities are more connected to the rest of the world. And of course, much of corona was spreading via travel, respiratory diseases. Villagers far away into the countryside were somehow insulated in many ways. At least that's what I would gather. It's easy to know if the disease had spread too much, too far, by the number of deaths. Even if it comes in as an, if the reason of death is, even if it's not known, is somebody in Zambia, when one is brought in dead to the mortuary, sometimes if an autopsy is not carried out, you don't know what killed this person. The number of those that were brought in dead were more concentrated in the bigger cities than in villages. So that means at least the villages might have been insulated. Corona, it hit quite close to home because one of my closest friends, he fell ill. And it is very traumatizing, right? Like you are far away from home and this person is not close to you. And you hear, I'm in the hospital, can't breathe properly. And I'm like losing my mind because I know what's happening to a lot of people that are just dying. And that was really traumatizing that such a person that was so close to me falls ill. And at the same time that this close friend of mine falls ill, I am also having an online meltdown. I'm discussing corona and another group of friends are calling it a Western disease, are calling it why this, why that, why should I get vaccinated? That I know it is just that it's being hysterical or they're just being downright unaware of the severity of this pandemic. And whilst I'm having that discussion on one side, I am fighting tears back into my skull because I have a very sick friend in the same geographical space.
Can you share with us, please, a significant moment that happened to you in the last 2.5 years?
The most significant moment happened in February. I lost a very close person to me. I've stayed in this country for nearly 21 years. And when I came to Norway, I was introduced to an artist by the name of Jan Groth. So Jan Groth was and is, in my opinion, one of the most important artists that has ever come out of this country, besides people like Munch, Edvard Munch. And I became his assistant when he came back from New York City. He was coming back from New York at the same time I was coming to Norway. And my old professor said, oh, my friend is coming and he needs an assistant. And I got a job. Of course, when you're working as an assistant to a very established artist, you're doing manual stuff, arranging this and that, running errands and cleaning this, cleaning that. And through time, I graduated to assisting him on production of his work. And our relationship kind of moved away from just being an assistant and becoming quite significant in that, almost becoming like a father figure. He was like 80-something years, 83 years old when he died. So we became so close and I learned a lot from him. And I became a very significant person in his private life even. the role he played in both in my private and my public life was so significant. It was so significant that I still consider him as one of my most important faithful patron of my own practice. I still consider him as one of my best teachers I've had in my practice, as in my artistic practice, but and my attitudes in life and how I relate to people around me. He is no doubt one of the most influencer in how I look at life. I wouldn't have, if I never met him, I think I may not have done what I'm doing now, like to developing an art center, for example. I wouldn't have done that. His generosity transcended beyond just wanting to help you. He looked beyond helping an individual. Because I remember very, very vividly one of the lessons, I would go to work for him like on a Friday or Saturday. We'd have like a 5-hour working day, but probably 3 hours just be talking. And you go home, he pays you for 5 hours. I'm like, we're just talking for the 3 hours. He's like, no, yeah, you're getting that. And then he sat me down one day. He said, when I was a young artist, when I was like struggling, I've seen myself in your struggles. And there was this patron. She came from Austria, and I was in New York and hustling and trying to get this and that done. But there was this patron, a lady, way older than us, young artists trying to fight around. She, without knowing it, made it possible for our careers. Because what we considered to be a lot of money when she purchases our little works and our this and that, it might not be significant to her. To us, it meant we could pay this and that, we could pay our rent, we could buy material, we could live another day. I learned a lot from her. I realized she wasn't just there to help us career-wise. She was making it possible for us to be of relevance to other people in future. She's no longer there, and I am here. Life lessons learned, I applied them to myself, and I hope this translates in whatever you're going to do in your life.
As you mentioned before, one of your dreams was to make the art center. And I would like to ask you if you can share with us how the idea and the notion of the Lusaka Art Center was evolving.
So I remember very, very vividly, 1998, 1999, and in the year 2000, I was in college. And one of my closest friends with whom we've remained so close, we live in Oslo together. Her name is Anawana Haloba, the one who is doing the Livingston Office for Contemporary Art. When we were younger, back in Zambia, I think there was just a sense, at least this I observed in her, when I look back in retrospect, that we had this attitude that I think we're gonna do something more than just being artists. First, we went to a college where we were being educated to become teachers. We were supposed to become art teachers. But it was obvious from that moment that our ambitions transcended beyond just being art teachers. We wanted to be artists as well. And that drove us. And we always would talk about, how about we establish this or that? How about we do establish spaces like little schools? We wouldn't just want to become like teachers in government schools or in private schools, but how about we establish spaces where we can teach as well? So that was an ambition, but never implemented or came to fruition, but maybe it was just planted. So then a few years later, we were both at the academy in Oslo. And during our times at the academy in Oslo, I remember vividly when we would go out to exhibition openings, for example, we would go to well-established spaces, which are sometimes partially financed by the state or sometimes partially financed by private entities. But also we would go to spaces which were run by students or former students who are having like a small room, artist-run space. To me, at least, I would look at that and say, this person was just 2 years ahead of me in the academy, and look what he or she is doing, running a space, starting or planting a seed that is exhibiting or that is dealing with this aspect of art or that aspect of art. Or to me, that was mind-blowing. It was so eye-opening. I'm like, oh yes, it's possible. I wouldn't just be working hard to establish a studio. I can also work hard to establish a space where there is some kind of an interaction. There is some kind of public and an artist moment of interaction, because I know that every space that is around is maybe appealing to this and that way of working. So if I establish this one, then I'm able to also bring forth a different perspective of sorts. So my ambition to establish a space begins right away when I'm a student, because I know that it's possible. I can see people that are leaving the academy doing it. I was thinking about something in abstract because I hadn't grown the courage yet to consider a physical space. Well, first, you're like, okay, I think I'm capable of doing it, but where? Not yet. And a few years that followed, when we were just about to leave the academy, to graduate from the academy, I had traveled a little bit. I came to Amsterdam visiting a friend of mine. He was at the Rijksacademy. And there as well, I found like this lively kind of art scene, underground, and where you go this way, you go that way, little spaces that are operating, intervening in their own special way in society and making themselves relevant. So I came back to Oslo, and towards the very few months of graduating the first degree in 2005, I did actually consider the idea of, if I establish my studio in Oslo, then I might as well do the same as other artists that I've seen establishing little art spaces. And maybe I can make that studio be kind of partly studio, partly a space of interacting with society. But of course, giving a voice, a different voice. I knew that I was privileged to have had 2 feet in 2 different countries, 1 foot in Zambia, 1 foot here. So I would bring about something that was a kind of unique. So it was a no-brainer to me that was possible, until it hit me that there is a financial component to doing things. You don't just do things. Even having a studio, it costs money. So when one realizes that there are other relevant components to achieving something, you begin now to withdraw and reassess your ideas. But also, when you're going to establish a space, where does it matter the most? Of course, it's a good idea to establish a space in Oslo, but I think my country, Zambia, needs it the most. Why? Because I can see that Oslo is saturated with spaces and they're thriving. So why should I just throw in another space? What if this was to be done in Lusaka? I know that Lusaka, a city of 2-point-something million people, also let's say a city of 700,000 people, I think Lusaka, which has fewer spaces, might need it the most or might benefit off it the most. And that's how the Lusaka space was born, out of necessity, out of considerations. So it is around, I think, 2008, a year after I just left. I did finish my master's, and the year after I left the academy, that this serious consideration that a space must be not here, but in Zambia began to manifest. And I think I remember approaching my friend Anawana. I said, listen, have you thought about this? She's like, yeah, of course I've been thinking about such. And it was around that time that we both began to commit to this idea that in one shape or form, we must be more active in intervening in the Zambian art space. For the simple reason that we saw the need and we saw the fertile ground. We saw the population and we realized there is only one way this will go, and that's positive wise, upwards, given the right resources and the right attitudes. We can achieve it back home. The Lusaka Contemporary Art Center is going to use art as a tool that is going to feed the world the uniqueness of this geographical space, to drive an agenda of the world perspective from the Zambian eye. We want to turn the tables and begin to create material that from the inside and feeds the world. That way, we kind of create an equilibrium of sorts. Zambians telling the world of themselves by themselves. That's what we want to use the center for that purpose, where perspectives are not always from the outside, but from within there to the outside, and feed the world.
Lusaka is the capital of Zambia. Can you please explain us the urban situation of the city?
You will find all the modern amenities in Lusaka, depending where you go. And then you will find places that may not necessarily belong in a Western modern city, like a ghetto in just like 5 minutes from the CBD, for example, Central Business District. And people just live their lives. The kind of differences are so very obvious, and the stark differences are so obvious in Lusaka when you cross it from east to west, south to northwest. If you took a drone and flew over Lusaka, you will see how different it looks, from high-end living to extreme poverty, and to extreme space, to no space at all, to extremely clean, to lots of good amenities, to no amenities at all, to extremely beautiful roads, to like no roads whatsoever, but people are just free flowing and free existing. It's a very multifaceted space. And I think that's one of what we have to be able to come to terms with and highlight: the multifacetedness and the ability to exist in this geographical space that is so diverse, but still belong to one space called Lusaka. And I think those are some elements that are very, very important to be able to highlight in a space like our art space, because those are the realities. There is no single reality that is Lusaka.
The Lusaka Art Center will be open next year on the 6th of January, 2023. Can you tell us how the center is going to operate and what's the program of it?
So the Lusaka Contemporary Art Center is in 3 parts that formulates the one institution. Each one of these 3 parts will be multi-purpose. The Lusaka Contemporary Art Center has what we are calling the research library. The research library is meant to house books and digital material that advances the center's agenda. That is very, very decolonial agenda, a very Zambia or Afrocentric agenda. So we are going to be very, very careful on how we curate the material. This is deliberate because there are very, very few and far between of such spaces that advances that are agenda from that part of the world. But also, we intended to use the library as the space to house all transcribed material of the activities of the center. And this is connecting now to the residency, for example. The residencies will also be highly curated. We'll be inviting artists, culture workers, and curators, and people working within the industry from all over the world, whose contribution to our collective material will matter the most in advancing, again, our agenda and advancing the Zambian position in the global art discourse. I have this very strong desire to also educate the international community about Zambia, because I see a lot of lack of knowledge. And it's very frustrating when you travel around and then you see this lack of understanding, lack of knowledge. Sometimes it is very frustrating that you cannot even interact because you just have this person who has so much ingrained prejudices. And that the whole idea of trying to invite these artists is not that they become like teachers, but also learners. So this is how the residency is going to operate. The residency will operate every time there will be two artists in residency at all times. And one artist will be from outside and one artist will be from Zambia all the time. So when we have these residents, there will be also the instigators, for example, of programming around them will be done in such a way that they become center, but also interactive with the Lusaka or the Zambian or the regional art communities, because we'll be inviting participants, for example. We have residencies, but also there will be people coming in to participate in workshops and discourse moments in the library. So that's the connection. So when we have these residencies, everything that happens around them, by them, with them, is transcribed through time into our biannual or annual publications that then becomes part of our library. And that also becomes resource material for those that will come in the future, or for the local artists, or for the local community that desire to understand what it is that is going on in the art center. And then we have the gallery. The gallery also is multi-purpose. Besides being an exhibition space, we want to use our gallery as a project room, for example, for the artists that are in residency, but also with community or other cultural players that are participating in some program that has been spearheaded by the resident, for example, or spearheaded by our management of the center. So these three arms, at least when I originally designed or thought about what mattered the most, or what was of need to the Zambian art community, or how I was going to intervene, I thought these three arms would be very effective. And it was out of that consideration that the three arms became kind of became what it is.
Is there any plan or discussion about communication or collaboration between the upcoming center and other art spaces, locally or internationally?
One of the most ambitious plans we have is to build a network of especially African-based art spaces, because I think there is a lot of learning to be done among each other, and there's a lot of cultural and environmental obvious connections that it would be easier pick up from what they have done. So we've been not formally, but informally been reaching out to, for example, there is a foundation in Uganda, it's called 32 Degrees East. They're also creating a new space. We've been having interactions, of course, in Zambia itself, ourselves, the Lusaka Art Center, and my colleague's space in Livingston, the Livingston Office for Contemporary Art. But we've also been reaching out down south. There is a national gallery in Zimbabwe, in Harare. We've been having informal outreach to people that are around or operate within that space, but also private galleries. First floor gallery, it's in Harare. Actually, we reach out to all these institutions because they're interesting and that we feel we can learn something from them, and that in future we can have collaborations that will be mutually beneficial. But we reached down South Africa. There is a very interesting South African curator who has been actually a very important and present figure in our own development. Her name is Gabi Global. She's a South African curator. She recently curated, I think, the Berlin Biennial. Gabi has been very present from the word go in all these little projects we're doing in Zambia. We are doing this deliberate outreach, reaching out, because we know we are young and we are novices, and that these other people have been present and have had greater interactions. We have deliberately reached out to even well-established individuals. For example, Mr. El Natsui is a Ghanaian, worked in Nigeria for many, many years, very, very big contemporary artist on the continent of Africa. They are also our inspirations, so to speak. We see them as people we can look up to and people we can learn from them, and people given a chance cooperate with to kind of, if we were to develop a very successful residency program and the content of it, and we are able, if given a tip, for example, by such established institutions and such established artists that, listen, this person could be interesting, then that would be a source of great pride on our part, that we get to have first-hand information, first-hand tip from well-respected individuals and institutions. We're also reaching out, for example, to the Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C., where one of their curators is actually sitting on our board. So we have to make these deliberate moves to ensure that we have cast our net wide enough to ensure that when we start operations, we are not totally novices, but we have information that kind of grounds us in a certain advantaged position as an institution.
Except of Lusaka Art Center, you're also the co-founder of Livingston Office for Contemporary Art Center. Can you tell us how it's evolve and operate?
The Livingston Office for Contemporary Art, we started the process of establishing it a while ago, before 2012, somewhere there. It was a bunch of us, myself, my friend Anawana, and my friend Milumbe, and Gabi was also part and parcel of this South African curator. So so you can see that she's been very present in the background into trying to help and chaperone us. So we wanted to establish a space in Livingstone, but our ambition at that time was quite, on my side, I feel a little naive. The idea that we can approach government entities, for example, and convince government entities that, oh, okay, guys, here's a great idea we have. We want to you guys to come on board, right? So we had approached a municipality, Livingstone. The director there was very happy. She was like, oh, welcome in my office. Yeah, my director of finances, director legal, director this. Let's discuss this idea. Good idea. Government changes. She moves out. We're no longer a priority. I told my colleague, I'm like, okay, listen, we have to go private. If we're going to be successful in anything, we are going to establish spaces in our private space. And that's how the Livingstone Office for Nearby Arts Center started operating on a private space that my friend Anawana owns in Livingstone. The mainstay of the Livingstone Office for Nearby Arts Center is it's called the Mini Lab. The Mini Lab is basically local and international young artists are gathered together in one physical geographical location, and they are exposed to knowledge. So, but of the same kind of calibers, right? So what my friend does, she organizes tutors, so to speak, for the lack of a better word, tutors from around the world, colleagues that are in the teaching profession, but also in other professions, established in the cultural industry from around the world, that become tutors to these young artists that are coming from maybe Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, maybe Tanzania. The recent one of the young artists actually came from Spain. She was interested in the project. She came to join it. So the idea is to have up and coming younger artists or people that are young but are interested in establishing a niche in the art industry, curators, writers, name them. So LuCAC, the Livingstone Office Contemporary Arts Center, also has a collaborative way of raising young curators, collects a group of young artists, some of whom actually will produce or will work towards producing a project. And then this young curator curates an exhibition, for example, in Livingstone, and have this exhibition, and that builds up the kind of the momentum and builds up the portfolio for the Livingstone Office Contemporary Arts Center. But when they exhibit at what's called the National Gallery. And so basically LuCAC has been almost in many ways one of the significant contributors to the life of the National Gallery, because when they are done with the development, they will have their results exhibited at the National Gallery in Livingstone, the same town. So yeah, so it's become a very important component in the life of many young artists, but also in the life of the town, but also in expanding the reach of the Zambian relevance, artistic relevance to the world.
In the blog of Sleeping of Tomorrow, there were some questions for you, and one of them was repeating a few times. Is there any interest to the African artists or the art scene to be engaged or being seen in the European or international scene, or it's more going inside and looking on itself?
So Zambia is a very interesting space. Let me say Lusaka. Let me speak of Lusaka. Lusaka is a very interesting space. That there's been this marriage of convenience between the people with capital, with money, mostly bankers, lawyers, and some rich foreigners or people of foreign origin but Zambians who have the capital and maybe some kind of taste for art. And there is the producer, the artist, the maker. And the maker finds, sometimes operates in his studio, a buyer comes, buy an object, buys a piece. goes and hangs it in his place or creates a collection, builds a collection through the years. There is that direct, and then operators in between comes in and out. There hasn't been much stability when it comes to the middleman, the middle operator, say galleries, so to speak, right? Galleries have come and gone. Galleries have risen and collapsed. And now there is what is called the Zambian National Visual Arts Council. It's a collective. And it has played as a middle institution for many, many years. Very, very static. Nothing changes, nothing goes, nothing transformative, but it exists as a middle space that transforms from the studio, private studio, through that space into the collector's hands. Other players have come in that have decided we are going to take a step further. We are going to be educational. We are going to be provide a space of intellectual awakening among artists, or some kind of that kind of interventionist power play. They've come in. Some of them have managed to live long enough to have had an impact. Some of them have folded. I think there is, yes, a desire to be present in the most established, right, art environment. Journals, for example, when you read journals, art newspapers, art magazines globally, what pops up the most is what would consider the Western art scene. It has the biggest voice, it has the biggest presence, and capital circulates the most in that space, right? So it is obvious that there will be that natural desire that I want part of this. I want to be part of this because I want to benefit from this. So that's an almost a universal desire because to establish a studio, to have a respectable art practice, it doesn't just end with your great ideas. It also matters when you are able to sell something to many people. It also matters when you're able to be considered, to be written about in the journals that you read. First, the underlying goal by most practicing artists today is to be able to make a buck out of what they make. So the desire is to self-service first. So that there is a very well-oiled local collectors kind of class. It exists, but also there is a very Western leaning collection class, and galleries are operating with both of them. The galleries that exist, 37D or the Urgency, Mwimbi Fine Art, the Zambian National Visual Arts Council, which is the Henry Tayali Art Center, one of the main art spaces, or Twice Art Gallery, there is an established in Zambian indigenous collectors that collect work for both their private consumption or for their businesses, of their galleries that they're opening privately. Because there's a lot of this, in the last few years, there's been all these inverted commas rich people have been also wanting to establish their own galleries that are private galleries in which they share their collections with friends and families. And sometimes they're opening them up to the public once in a while. And a lot of them in locals, like Zambians, which is very good. And which I consider to be a very good trend, because that also will open up to younger collectors.
So I would like to say thank you for Victor for joining us today for this talk.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to talk to you about this.
And thank you for joining us. If you are interested to see and hear previous talks and discussions, go to the blog of Sleeping for Tomorrow, or register for our newsletter for more updates.